Welcome back. We're going to continue with Rome in this session. And again, we're going to sort of do a brief survey of a series of topics. I want to talk about the games, the gladiatorial games. I want to talk about slavery a bit. I want to talk about Roman cities and some other things. We'll see how far we get. The gladiatorial games, this is the one topic that everyone seems to be familiar with regards to the Roman Empire. And of course, many people have seen Ridley Scott's film, Gladiator, where you see the spectacle, the public spectacle in the arena of gladiatorial contest, wild animals, et cetera, et cetera. So let me go through my notes here and try to make the points that I want to about the games. Exotic animals are brought to Rome, often from thousands of miles away, and sacrificed for the pleasure of the crowd. And this is a theme that you'll see that runs through Roman history. This attempt by the elite to pacify and please the Roman mob by bringing them to the games and entertaining them. The games are almost an advertisement demonstrating the power of Rome, demonstrating the power of the emperor and his ability to put on these games. For the average Roman citizen in an arena watching these spectacles, it must have given them a sense of pride to think that they are a part of a society that is so powerful, that has such a long reach, that it could bring tigers back to Rome, could bring lions and other exotic creatures. So I guess you could say the games, at least in part, have a way of seducing people for their loyalty to the Roman state. And of course, these poor people who are being sacrificed are not trained or prepared for this. Oftentimes, it's criminals condemned to death. Sometimes Christians for their refusal to take part in Roman civic life. Sometimes these people are compelled to fight each other. Sometimes they're thrown to the wolves, so to speak, and destroyed by wild animals. My statistics say that in one particular rather spectacular games that took place in 107 of the Common Era, the Emperor Trajan put on these games, and it says here that over 11,000 animals of different types perished in these games. Can you imagine this network that the Romans had to procure dangerous wild animals, to capture, first to find them, and then to capture them alive, and then transport them back to Rome? This had to be an intensive and dangerous industry. And of course, we also had sea battles where the arenas could be flooded. And we actually have men aboard ships doing battle in front of the crowd. Now, I've heard this argument made a few times regarding the crowd and the appeal of the games to the crowd. There's an old argument in U.S. Southern history regarding the fact that poor whites and African-American slaves never came together to overthrow the antebellum system. Poor whites and African-American slaves probably had more in common economically with each other than the poor whites did with the rich, elite, slave-owning whites. But they never did come together. The poor blacks, poor whites, they never did come together. The racial division was much more powerful than the class division. And you get a sense of that same sort of thing going on here in Rome. The people in the arena watching these poor people be sacrificed probably thought to themselves, well, I may not have much, but at least I'm not being sacrificed to wild animals or forced to fight for my life in the arena. I'm not at the bottom of this social hierarchy, in other words. So, bread and games to keep the people happy. Games are an attempt to appease and entertain the people. And you'll see again, a long-running theme in Roman history is the elite attempt to seduce the urban masses. for political support. And the games are a good way of doing this. The games are eventually banned. Let's see, what does it say here? 395 of the Common Era. But we see the tradition of the Roman games even played out in our own lifetime. Let's face it, why do people watch NASCAR? I'm guessing for that wreck, and sometimes a fatal wreck. When they have the National Hockey League, where fighting is integral to the contest. And of course we still have live wrestling on television and martial arts fighting. So we have these public spectacles in our own society that harken back to the public spectacles of ancient Rome. Now I want to say a few words here about slavery in ancient Rome. As the Roman Empire expands, booty or riches of various sorts and slaves are shipped back to the center, back to the capital of the empire. Sometimes POWs will be shipped home as slaves. And of course we have Germans and Gauls and Syrians and Carthaginians and you name it, people from all around the Mediterranean basin. As the Roman legions expand in every direction, again, riches, plunder, and slaves are sent back. We see these slaves often engaged on these large estates, and this is important because in time I think we can draw a line from these large Roman estates worked by slaves. We can draw a line from there to an emerging feudalism as we go deeper, or as we go forward from the Roman times to the breakdown of the Western Empire and the rise of what we call feudalism in Western Europe. It's interesting that many soldiers, legionnaires, while on campaign, and sometimes these campaigns take years, they will lose their estates. Their estates will be gobbled up by wealthy patricians, and quite often these patricians will use slaves to work these estates. These legionnaires return home, their estates have been confiscated, and then quite often they have nowhere to go but the cities to try to find relief. So again, you have an increasing number of poor people, urban poor, the very people who the games appeal to. In Sicily, which would become part of the Roman Empire, slaves were branded like you would brand cattle on a farm. Slaves are also mixed by nationality and language to prevent slave unity, slave conspiracies to overthrow their masters. And think here of the Middle Passage, which we'll talk about in this class toward the end of the semester. The Middle Passage is that sea route from West Africa to the New World, the sea route that slaves have to take to arrive at their new destination. And on this Middle Passage, the white crew will mix Africans by nationality, by language, to try to cut down on the possibility of a conspiracy among the slaves to take over the ship. If you mix people by language and keep them fighting it with each other for food, they'll have less time to conspire against the white crew. Of course, we do have slave revolts in ancient Rome. I suppose Spartacus, many of you have probably seen the movie or have heard of this. Probably the largest, most famous of the slave revolts. I think the important thing here, though, to remember, a couple of things, is that as we go forward in Roman history, you'll see more and more and more of the labor force of Rome comprised of slaves. And at the same time, as the Roman Empire expands further and further in every direction, you see slaves and plunder brought back to the center of the empire. So I've heard some historians say that one of the reasons for the fall of Rome is the increasing number of slaves in the society, people who don't have a stake in the Republic. And at the same time, the Roman economy increasingly becomes one of plunder, not one of production, but one of theft, where the riches of adjoining societies are sent back to the Roman urban centers. So let's stop there with slaves, and next time we'll talk about cities and we'll talk about trade. Thank you.